Hi there, everybody. Welcome to the AFSA Extra Credit Podcast. Hope you're all doing well. We've got a two-timer with us today. The wonderful Terry Horn, Managing Director of People Strategies, is joining us once again. Terry, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Dan. How are you?
Doing great, excellent. Our last conversation was very well received by the listeners, so we wanted to make sure we had you back to discuss some other items. Economy, hiring, all of these things, retention, all of these things continue to be front of mind for everyone. And so today we're going to kind of dive into employment branding and creating your company's value proposition. We talk about marketing and advertising and branding, and we're very good usually at branding our own products, but perhaps not ourselves to the people that we want to come work for us. So before we get too far, just give us a bit of a reminder about you and People Strategies, Terry.
Well, thanks for having me back, Dan. People Strategies is a firm I founded 15 years ago to support clients in needs of talent strategies, whether it be in the form of recruitment, talent management, or HR consulting. My background prior to that was working in financial services as a human resources practitioner for over 20 years, supporting both consumer lending and banking.
So thanks for taking a minute and sharing with us. Let's just get started with probably what's the most obvious question here. Why is it so important for companies to have an employee value proposition?
Well, just as you mentioned, companies have a marketing strategy, they often have a sales strategy, and they always have an operational strategy. It's just as important to have an employee strategy, not just for your recruitment efforts, but for onboarding and retention as well. Every employee wants to know what the company's value proposition is for them. How will they grow and develop within the company to meet their own professional and personal goals?
And it's an interesting way of looking at it. But so how does one actually implement that idea? How do we get started with a value proposition for employees?
Well, it starts with conducting a needs assessment about what you currently have within your organization, and then brutally evaluating it, making sure that you understand what is going on within your organization, and then being open to what the opportunities are to make changes, to fill in gaps, possibly create new programs or processes so that you can address the needs of your evolving workforce. I would start personally by polling the employees anonymously if you can do that, and also the hiring managers to learn what they think can be improved. Once you understand what the common concerns are, you review them, identify the concerns with the leadership team, and then collaboratively work together to create a plan to address the needs.
Interesting. We've talked about this a couple of times in various topics, but it applies here as well. I think it's interesting that a lot of folks will do exactly what you said. We're gonna take an anonymous poll. We're gonna assess where we think we can improve. But one of the most important things is to be prepared to act on what you get back. We talked about that in the last episode with Adam Gailey and Philip Bohai about fair lending. You better be able to be ready to act on what you find. So that's all an important point of it. So who would you involve, Terry, in a project like that to gather that data?
In any case, it should be your HR team, as they should be driving this initiative despite maybe the size of them. And I know we've talked about some of the differences. You have very small companies that belong to ABSA, and you have very large organizations that belong to ABSA, all with differing HR size teams. I mean, you have some HR teams that are very small and that they don't have a lot of extra bandwidth, but this is really something that should be driven through your HR team, as they are usually in charge of all things employee engagement and hiring. These two functions do go together. HR should be gathering data from the C-level team, hiring managers, and employees. So it should be done at all levels. Conducting these focus groups or conducting focus groups may be the quickest way to gather some initial data. But if you really want to probe and get down into more of the deeper issues, I would suggest using something like a SurveyMonkey, some type of online application that would provide some anonymity to people so that they can feel free to express their concerns or their needs. Doesn't always have to be something bad. It's just, the goal is to get as unfiltered information as possible.
Interesting. So once they gather the data and we know what we need to fix, what do you do? How do you actually create the value proposition?
It comes down to getting the buy-in from your hiring managers all the way through to your C-level team on how you want to portray your company in the eyes of your applicants, your candidates, and then ultimately your employees. It's one of those things where HR can provide the data, they can be the messenger all day long, but unless you're getting true commitment, and as you referred, the action, the willingness to execute on it, you're not going to see that. It's about walking the talk and not just putting out some flashy or catchy value statements, but really, what does it mean to work at your organization? And does that new employee or even the tenured employee agree that this environment is what you say it is? Because if it's not observable, then it's not really creating a culture. You can say things, but you have to really do those things in order for people to see it as being it's an observable culture. So that's the key. And then how you go forth and describe it and mass market it in your recruitment and your onboarding efforts through your training and delivery, all through your communications, that's key. That's what's going to get you where you need to go. And sometimes the message, it doesn't have to be complex. The simpler, the better. That way people can see it and feel like they're part of it. It doesn't have to be this big, long, complex, value proposition or statement. They just have to really understand what it is that your company is trying to accomplish, with each employee, and what those employees are doing for the betterment of that company. I think that's really key. And utilizing your employees as and I said this in my first podcast, but encouraging your employees, utilizing your employees' networks to help you to recruit for new employees when you need to fill openings. Those are critical resources to creating that value proposition. If your employees are really feeling it, they're living it, then it makes it a lot easier, especially in a smaller organization that has limited resources, to create that value proposition. So when you come to work here, you'll notice this, you'll feel this, and you'll enjoy what we have to offer as an organization. And that's really the ultimate goal is you're trying to get to.
Right. So HR should drive this thing, but let me put on my communications director hat and put in a little plug from the comms folks, because our job is to shape a message. And I think the communications departments in your various companies, both big or small, or communications person, if it's a very small company, can be helpful when we're talking about trying to develop a marketing plan that get the word out to employees and then extend that out to your applicants and folks that are looking for jobs with your company too.
Absolutely. Communications is key to helping that process. And not only, it's the ongoing, and that's the thing, I guess, the value that I feel like communication brings is it's the ongoing communications and reminders of here are the cool things that we are doing in our organization that need to be brought to light. And, you see a lot on social media where people say, hey, I just, completed Habitat for Humanity with my team today, or we did, a Meals on Wheels program, or we worked at a food bank today, or, those kind of reminders about the importance of the organization giving back to the community. Those are just, those are snippets, brief moments of reminders of why you want to work for a company that cares about not only their bottom line, but the welfare of the community that they serve.
Right. Excellent. So, no matter the size of the organization, no matter, exactly what business line they're in, they all have unique cultures. And so keeping all that in mind, what are some key things our listeners need to consider when they're starting to create their value proposition?
Well, I think they need to consider the following. One is, what is the makeup of their current workforce? Is it a tenured versus new employee base? What's the attrition by department? Who's leaving? What are the exit interviews stating? What are the general themes for each functional area? Once you have that data and understand, what's going on in your organization, that'll really help you to start honing in on where, what you need to say. For example, some people say call centers have higher attrition than some of their support teams, like say risk or IT. Well, then why don't you ask the managers what they're doing to show the employees in risk and IT are feeling valued and engaged? What is being done in those departments versus what isn't being done in a call center would be one of the first questions I'd ask. And it's not just the type of work. I know people say, well, it's the calls, it's the customer interaction. But people in IT and risk have stressful, complex situations that they're dealing with too. What keeps them engaged? What keeps them feeling valued within the organization while they're doing their job? So understanding more about what that looks like will help you to determine, whether their relationship to their peers, to their managers, to the department, and then finally, ultimately to the company, what does that mean to them? And then the second thing would be to assess what resources you have for communications during the recruitment process. Reviewing, updating all the position descriptions, making sure your postings and application process is user friendly, and if possible, interactive. Working with your communications people, maybe working with your marketing team, to get ideas from them. They're experts at what they do in their respective fields. And I think HR sometimes thinks, they might have to work on their own, but those are, in my mind, internal resources from the communications team, from the marketing teams that they could be tapping into to get their expertise and maybe even, some assistance in how they are, going out there and marketing this information. And then around technology, and I know, everybody talks about the investments in technology, but I think it's really crucial in HR to make sure that you've got a robust applicant tracking system and that your technology allows for a response to any postings that you get. I hear more often than not in my role that people say, oh, I post for something and I never hear anything. I never even knew if they got my resume. And so something as simple as saying, thank you for applying. We've got lots of applications to get through. We'll get back to you. It may take us some time, but at least setting the tone or expectation to thank them that they received the information, because that is, it's not unusual for a recruiter, to have an extreme high volume of applicants for a position, and it does take a lot of time to get through these. But there's also the other side of it in trying to create a applicant experience for someone so that they feel that they're at least being heard and seen in the process. The next part is having the executive team use their social media feeds to post positions. I see more and more small companies doing that. It used to be just something you saw coming out of HR, but now sales, support, other operations leaders, I see posting roles about, their company hiring. That's free advertising. And social media is a great way to get the word out. And I oftentimes see things not only being shared, but kind of passed along. And I think that's really helpful to organizations who don't maybe have a big budget for recruitment advertising. Another issue is around building your onboarding process to communicate to new hires through the orientation, making sure that there's mentors, buddies, or people assigned to support the new hire transition, no matter what the level and what department they work in. And then again, ensuring that employee communications allow for two-way dialogue. We used to do this thing called check-ins, do a 2-week, a 30-day, 60-day, 90-day check-ins, just to make sure that the employee feels like they're getting the information they need, that they're getting the training they need, that they have access to, people within the organization, really understanding through a two-way dialogue what's going well, what maybe needs to be reassessed or overhauled completely, but constantly seeking that feedback and then acting on it. I think that's what's necessary to build trust and create a messaging that you really desire. This can be done through focus groups, employee engagement surveys, online surveys, but there's nothing that beats the value of just walking by someone's desk and saying, "How's it going?"
Nice. Yeah, I like that. It makes a lot of sense. So as we kind of wrap up here, any final thoughts, any 35,000-foot view from you, Terry?
I think the beauty of this topic is it's really practical, common sense advice. It's not science, but it is about creating a recipe that works for your organization. And then at that same time, creating that perfect dish over and over again, being very consistent. And that's how you create a legacy value proposition. I know you mentioned, the last podcast you did, it really is key to take action, because if people feel like they've given their feedback and then nothing is done with it, it often causes, just lack of engagement, sometimes even resentment. But you hear these terms, people checking out and not really, being as engaged as they need to be. If you don't use the information, then you really won't be creating an engaged workforce.
Awesome. Well, Terry Horn from People Strategies, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. It was fun. Good talking to you.
AFSA hopes you've enjoyed this edition of the Extra Credit Podcast. Don't forget to follow AFSA on Twitter at AFSA_DC and on LinkedIn. Just search for the American Financial Services Association. You can follow AFSA's SGA team on Twitter at AFSA_SGA. The blog at AFSAonline.org is also a great resource for the most up-to-date news. If you've got questions or if you'd like to suggest a guest, please shoot us an email at communications@afsamail.org or tweet at us. Join us next time for more Extra Credit. Thanks for listening.